Hi everyone, Holly from Save Your Kids here, and it's my utmost pleasure to introduce you today to a fantastic woman that I found out about first on LinkedIn, and I've been following the work that she's been doing. So I'd like to introduce you to Emma Hakansson.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Emma, your story really touched me because you speak so openly about what happened to you. So are you happy to share your story with us today?
Yeah. So when I was a young child, hadn't reached double digit age yet, I was sexually abused by someone who previously I had thought, was a really great protective person in my life who I trusted and who my family trusted, who my community trusted. So some of the things about my experience with child sexual abuse are a little bit different from a lot of the stories that we normally hear. The main thing being that the person who abused me was a woman. And that meant that the abuse was able to continue undetected, even when, my parents saw signs that I was being abused and actually thought I was being abused, but they went through every single adult man that I had ever been alone with. And so they completely missed the person who was actually abusing me. So, in a lot of ways, it's similar to so many survivor stories where it's someone who's kind of groomed an entire community to trust them. But that kind of woman aspect means that it's a little bit different, I guess.
And so there obviously were signs that your parents picked up on. My basic thing is teaching children protective behaviours or protective education. Had you learnt protective education as a young child?
The only thing that I was taught as a kid, both in like a school program setting and also at home, was stranger danger was a huge one, and that was not relevant, and it's not relevant to most survivors. And then the other thing was the 5-finger program, where it's about the 5 adults that you can trust and speak to. But that was taught to me in a really vague, kind of sterile way, where adults think that it's too much to talk about abuse with children. So it was kind of just said to me, like, if something is wrong or you're upset, you should go to these people. And to a child, to me, that sounded like if someone is bullying me at school, if someone pushes me over, abuse is a much more complicated thing than what I could comprehend at that age. I was confused. I didn't really know what I was feeling other than that it was really like yucky. So in my mind, those 5 people and what I was feeling, it didn't connect that they were supposed to go together. So I wasn't really taught anything that in my mind was able to be protective or helpful.
So nobody basically said, if anybody touches your private parts, tell a grown-up.
Not that I ever remember. Obviously there are things that have happened in my life that I don't remember, but I never remember being taught that. And if I was, it definitely wasn't with the kind of additional element of that it doesn't matter even if it's someone who's been put in a position of authority over you. Because I think there are so many things where we say that children, you can say no to things, you're allowed to say stop to people, but we teach children all of these things, and at the same time we teach them that adults always know what's best and that we should always listen to adults. And those two things kind of counteract each other, and that means we lose the autonomy side of things because we're so focused on compliance and obedience in children.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I've got a huge concern next year when the whole country's going consent mad, that, I want to produce resources that are really specific and not vague. And, we need to, people think that children, if you teach protective education, you're ruining their innocence.
Yeah.
But kids love rules. If you are really specific and not vague and airy-fairy, I've found, because I've been teaching this program for over 35 years, that kids aren't scared of it. Knowledge is power. And, with the grooming, people that groom children, I talk about tricky people rather than stranger danger.
Yeah.
And try and create resources. So I've written 2 songs just recently with Aboriginal kids in remote communities. One about one about grooming, and then the latest one is on sextortion. And we have to be, I think we have to be really clear and open and honest with children. I think children value that, rather than trying to make the world rainbows and unicorns. It's not that you're frightening them, but giving them clear rules about who can touch you. We know that about 45% of child sexual abuse is either children to children or teenagers on children as well. And so, I think we have to be really specific and clear that the only reason that anybody should be touching your private parts is for medical or for hygiene reasons.
Yeah.
Now, with your experiences and things like that, what sort of, the reason I reached out to you was to find out what resources could I produce that might have helped you. So have you got any clear ideas about what should be in a really good program?
Yeah, I think that for me, when we talk about, you can't talk about child abuse with children because it will scare them. I don't think you actually need to. I think it's more about teaching children, which is something that is already happening, but to understand that their feelings and their thoughts are more important, and that they can, their individuality can override what they've been told. I think that, we don't need to go into detail with children of here's exactly what could happen to you, because that's obviously traumatizing and we're trying to prevent that.
Plus, if that specific thing doesn't happen,
then
they're going to, well, it's similar, but it's not exactly. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
No, but you're right. But I think that it's more about if children really understand, I think that when we teach compliance and obedience to children, we kind of teach them to stop listening to their internal system. And so if we can teach children that how they feel, even if they don't completely understand their feelings, even if they can't articulate it, that's actually more important than anything else. And that if someone makes you feel uncomfortable, it doesn't matter whatever label has been put on them, because we put labels on people like priest, teacher, coach, those kinds of labels, mother, father, that are very this person is in charge, this person knows best. I think that we have to avoid ever placing adults in positions where they're untouchable and should always be assumed as good. So really, I think what we should be teaching is teaching adults to not accept a system where adults are infallible and where children can't know more than adults, which is kind of, counterintuitive to everything we're taught today, where children become better by listening to adults. Of course, children have to learn from the wisdom of adults, but children also have, their kind of innate own stuff that they develop over time just by being in the world. So I feel like we just need to prioritize that more.
Beautiful, beautiful. Because one of the things I teach children is about their early warning signs, our fight, flight, freeze, faint, and fawn. And I haven't actually, up until recently, talk to children. I've talked about the fight, flight, freeze, and faint, but I haven't worked around the fawning part of it much. And I've been trying to get my head around how to actually explain that to children, because it's a safety device. It's, but kids might think that they consented, or because, your body just wants to keep you safe. And so to try and help them recognize that side of it as well. So one of the things I was thinking of doing is, because one of the things when we talk about early warning signs, I use animals, and we talk about how snails and turtles go into their shell and that squid squirt ink. And so I was trying to going along the lines of how some animals, like the suckerfish that go under a shark, the shark doesn't, eat them because they're there to do a job, sort of thing. So it's not that they like the shark, or the birds that sit on hippopotamuses and they don't get attacked because they're there to do a job. Because it's really complex to try and talk to kids, but I think that we need to, because I think that's one of the reasons children don't disclose, because, and especially for men, their bodies our bodies are designed to react in a certain way. And the men that I've worked with, because they got an erection when they were attached, they thought they must have consented and they must have liked it. So I think we really need, in a really child sensitive way, but I think we still need to go that deep with children and to take some of the blame away, because children must think, why me? What did I do for that to happen to me? And I think that's why a lot of people still take so long to disclose. What are your feelings around that?
I think also that children, like, if they do feel that something is wrong, because even if someone has got you to the point where you think that you're supposed to trust them, and so that anything they do to you must be right, because, you know, everything that they do must be right, it means that any kind of discomfort is something that you put on yourself. So I started to hate this woman, and I started to hate seeing her, and I was really like, everything that I felt good about her went away. But then I felt a lot of guilt and shame about that, because I thought that meant that I was being a bad child, and that how dare I, you know, feel uncomfortable around someone that everyone else around me loved. So I think that's part of it too, where if you think that your discomfort is something that you should kind of stamp out and hide, it kind of further perpetuates the grooming that's already happened, because it's a sort of internalized grooming, where if there's any warning sign to the child that says, actually, I don't think this is right, you kind of self-wash that out and say, no, of course they're right. You don't know what's right. And then the guilt and the shame kind of, gets deeper. And I think that also means that, I think in my head, it's also really important that we're not just teaching children how to disclose, or not just teaching children like how to realize something is wrong, but to teach all of the adults around a child who's being abused how to notice in the really, really early stages. Like if you're already noticing that a child is wetting their bed or doing something that's kind of like a really clear sign of trauma that's quite far along, it's already too late. Like something should have been picked up sooner. And I think that there's a lot of ways that you can kind of continually engage with kids in communities to gauge where they view different adults, and to understand like how much trust they have in them, and to understand how that changes. Because I think one of my ideas is to have this kind of trust scale that children place different adults in their life. And it means that even if you had put someone, you know, towards the really happy, smiley side of the scale, and it goes down a little bit, even if it's a little bit because you think, oh, I don't want to say that I feel really uncomfortable with this person because I don't think that's the right thing to do, any difference should be something that is something that adults can pick up on and can talk about, and that immediately takes it off the child as their responsibility to get to the point where they can, like, to expect a child to come forward and say someone touched me is just like so far beyond what children are capable of much of the time. So I think anything we can do to get that burden off of children and onto adults is really important too.
Totally. And, you know, I'm really clear. It is not children's jobs to keep themselves safe. It is our jobs as adults. We have to do it. But for me, children are the last line of defense. Just recently, I was at a conference and there were two amazing young women. You've probably come across them, Phoebe and, I've forgotten her name. Two sisters from New South Wales who are fighting to change the way that they're interviewed and things like that.
Oh, who were doing the Justice Shouldn't Hurt campaign.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
And you know, these young women were so they're 16 and 14. I think her name's Emma. She said, you know, it happened to me when I was 5 and I didn't have the words. You know, people, you know, she was believed straight away and everything happened. But she didn't have the words to be able to tell. So, you know, I'm really clear that it's not children's jobs, but if you don't know that somebody should be doing that to you, or, you know, one of my books about child-to-child sexual abuse is, you know, other children shouldn't be touching your private parts. It's not a game. It's not funny. You know, boys tend to flick each other on their private parts thinking it's, you know, just larking about. No, that's actually against the law. We need to be really clear with children, but trying to get parents along to parent workshops is the bane of my life, because parents think, I'm a good parent, it's never going to happen to my child. You know, we know everybody, we trust everybody. But, you know, your story is so poignant because, you know, it literally can be anybody, can't it?
Yeah, it can be anybody. And it can be also, you know, I went to, like, I had a lot of privileges in my life. And so I think it's also so important people don't assume that if their child has like economic privilege and privilege of education and all those kinds of privileges, that it means they're safe, and that child abuse only happens to kids who don't have those privileges, because it happens everywhere. And what you said about language, I think that's also a really important thing, because one of the things that I talk about in the project that I work on with the Australian Childhood Foundation is language, and that adults and children need to have a shared language that exists on children's terms. And so one example of why I felt that was so important is because my kind of only attempt to disclose to my mum around the time it was happening is I said to my mum that I thought that this person was weird. And in mum's world, weird is not a particularly strong word. And especially, she says, looking back, if I'd said it about a man, that it would have kind of raised alarm bells for her. But because it wasn't a man, she kind of was just like, oh, what do you mean? Like, just, it wasn't anything to her. And to me, it was this hugely significant thing. And because that little breadcrumb wasn't picked up on, I went, oh, okay, I won't bring it up again. And that was also, I don't know what I would have said next. Like, that was kind of my peak. That was the vocabulary that I had, because I didn't know how to pull apart like feelings of disgust, feelings of like there was too much to unpack verbally. And so one of the things that I think could really help linguistically is to set a kind of code with not just parents, because obviously parents can be the people who are abusing children often, but for there to be code words even like for an entire class of children, where they know that if they say kumquat or cucumber or like whatever word they make up, that they understand that's their way of sort of giving things that they can't articulate to an adult. To say something is wrong, I'd feel lots of things, I don't know how to articulate that though, so now you have to help me articulate it. And then that adult can help break it down and hopefully get to the point where they actually understand what's happening, and that they know that's their responsibility to not stop until they know what's happening.
Wow, that's priceless. And I hope people listening to this or watching this video really take up on that, because, you know, kids so often just, and that's when I train teachers especially, kids don't just come out and say what's happening. They do just throw out little tidbits. And if you miss that, and so one of the things I say to adults is you need to listen to your early warning signs. And if a kid's, you know, and, you know, I understand, especially parents are busy, but if a child says, you know, I don't want to go to so-and-so's house, even if you...
Why is that? Yeah,
go back later and say, what, you know, why? That's okay. But just, can you tell me why you didn't want to, you know, kiss that person or go to that person's house or do that? We need to check in more with children and you know, also the thing that you said around language, for 25 years with protected behaviours, you know, the hand thing that you mentioned in the beginning was called a network. Now that's an adult concept. And
yeah, children don't have networks.
So I call it a safety team now with children. You know, we still need it. It's still a good strategy, but who's on your safety team? And, you know, especially around unpacking those people. I've got a poster and we brainstorm all of the people that the children know. So I loved your idea about the safety scale. And yeah, I'm really encouraged. I hope you There is something that I use. I don't know if you've seen it. It was designed for children with special needs called the circle concept. Have you seen it?
I'm not sure.
So if you picture a target in your mind, in the center circle, so the bullseye, that's where the child goes. And then the circles go out in degrees of intimacy. So there's a blue circle, which is for close family, then a green circle, which is for extended family, a yellow circle, which is, so it's called the cuddle, the hug, the high five, the wave, and then the stranger space just keeps going out.
Yeah.
And for 35 years, I've used that with children because, it's sort of similar to what you're talking about. And so children put people in their lives in these different circles. But one of the, when I'm working with children, one of the things I tell children is a story of my uncle who used to take out his teeth and try and kiss me. So I'd say, even though he was my uncle, he should go in the green circle, but I would put him in the orange circle. He can't be a stranger, but I'd want him that far away from me. So it's similar to what you're talking about. And because it was designed for children with special needs, I use it with all children. And that's been a really good, so I can send you some information around that if that would be useful.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And like the children should be able to choose where people are in their circles, not just have it that it's assumed based on a relationship, like you're
exactly.
saying. Yeah.
If you've got a sibling that's hurting you, you're not going to put them in the blue. You're going to put them again away from you. Yeah. And because it's done with photos and especially for children with special needs, because we know, they're 7 times more likely to be abused than mainstream children anyway. It's such a good system. But for even for older children, to have a sliding scale would be, I'm really excited by that. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I hope we'll be able to have like really clear resources on how to use a scale like that and how to use a code. And I think having them also, like you're saying, so many adults are really busy and, working and doing all of these things. And so I think they can kind of be used as check-in tools where that whether you're a teacher or a parent, maybe once a week, maybe fortnightly, like you check in with the children that are under your care and you go through the scale and you go through all of that, so that if you have missed something during the last week or fortnight where you haven't noticed that someone said, it might not even be, I don't want to go to this person's house. It might be, is that person going to be there? Which is really easy to miss.
Yes.
Having a time where the whole point is to not miss anything means that, it's like just a more thought out check-in moment rather than trying to be hyper aware at every second of the day, which isn't possible.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. And we're not, blaming parents because, they're groomed as well. And, but when the statistics are what they are, we just have to, and that's my whole thing, is how can I create the most up-to-date resources that are going to try and combat some of this stuff, because, it's not getting any less. And now with the cyber world, with the grooming of kids being on TikTok and stuff like that, people think children would be safer nowadays, but in fact they're not.
Yeah, there's more avenues for it. And I think it's also the online realm is something that's really important for adults to get as well, which is again not about like your child's online account, but adults' online accounts, where it's like people sharing stuff about their kids because they love them, but not realizing like how many people that information is going out to, how many people might be seeing photos and looking at them in a way that you don't want them to be looked at. The online part is a huge mess.
Yeah, it's even made it so much harder. I was reflecting, I'm speaking on Australia Day at a town that I lived in back in the 90s. And I went there and was teaching protected behaviours back then. And I'm sort of going through my speech going, oh my gosh, how different is my program now than when it was back in the 90s? Because, I've had to create all these other resources to do the cyber stuff. but at the baseline of protective behaviours is, you know, helping children articulate their feelings, having a safety team, talking about the UN rights of the child, teaching consent. You know, the foundations is there, and then we just add the cyber component on top of that.
Mm.
You know, talking about, you know, I love what you said about giving kids words for their emotions and things like that, because, you know, kids use words, you know, yucky and weird, but like when you hear it through adults' ears, you might not, you know, I get that yucky feeling. Well, what is that yucky feeling?
It's
how
the
do you?
same. Sorry, you go.
No, you go.
It's the same, I think, also the other way for when adults are kind of probing a child to see if something is wrong. Like adults specifically asked me if I'd been abused, but that didn't mean anything to me. And I had also been asked if someone hurt me. And I thought that hurting was, like I said earlier, someone bullying me or someone pushing me over. Like there's a lot of assumed knowledge in asking a child if they've been hurt, because I hadn't got to that point of understanding that. So I think that a lot of it, when we talk about language, isn't just about like, I think it's less about giving children words and more about having adults know the words that children already use and what they really mean, kind of like getting a dictionary of your own child rather than like, trying to get them to fit into an adult framework of talking about something really huge and complicated.
But also, you know, getting adults to understand that once you know something's happened to your child, not to investigate, because that could take the evidence for police and things like that. So, you know, here in Western Australia, the legislation says once you've formed a belief that something's happened, then that's when you report it. Don't go, you know, delving into it, putting words, did they touch you here? What about this? And because, you know, later on, if that goes to court, then it can be used against the child. And
which I think really should change as well.
Oh, like, gosh.
The concept of children as inherently unreliable witnesses just because they're children is awful. Like, how are children ever supposed to have justice then? So that's a whole other thing to fix as well.
And that's why I'm so inspired by these two sisters and their, you know, I've shared their petition several times, and I'm hoping, because their petition's for a pilot, but I'm hoping that it's going to be rolled out Australia wide, because you know, it only re-abuses the child having to go to court and make their disclosures, and then, you know, and then we don't get the outcome that we need, because, you know, the other people have got really slick lawyers that trip the kids up, and, oh, what about this, and you said that, and you know, we have to make it more child friendly. I mean, I wish that we didn't have to, you know, kids didn't have to disclose. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful. I know we've been trying to do this for quite some time, and I've been away, and I'm just so humbled that you made time to speak with us. And I hope people have got a lot out of this. I think I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the future, because I know you will change the landscape in this area. I want to watch very closely and to see if I can, you know, piggyback on and also add, you know, some things, because, you know, I'm really blessed that I get to work across Australia with lots of different varieties of children. You know, I've taught my program in 84 remote communities across Australia, and the complexities that happen in those communities and stuff like that. So is there anything, before I let you go, that you would like parents, like a message to parents? What would be your parting words of wisdom to them?
Well, the first would be that I would obviously encourage everyone listening to keep up and follow along with the Australian Childhood Foundation project that I'm working on, because we will have good things coming out of it. But I think also the big thing that I would like kind of every adult to know is that I think so long as we prioritize children being well behaved over children being able to act autonomously, we're not going to be able to kind of get to the root of protecting children. And I think that can sometimes go really counter to how we view children within our society. But I think that I would much rather have children who are like badly behaved than children who are being abused. And I think children that act more autonomously and that are more comfortable with pushing boundaries of what adults have set, they're actually often safer and more able to keep themselves safe, even though they shouldn't have to. So yeah, let children do whatever they want sometimes.
Brilliant. And that's so when I'm training teachers, that's one of the things I say to them. They're not bad children. Behavior is communication. Why are they behaving in that way? They're trying to tell you something. They don't have the words to articulate it. But don't just think, oh, they're just being naughty just to upset you.
Yeah.
Spend the time and find out what's happening for that child. I think, you know, back in my day, I was brought up, children were seen and not heard, should be seen and not heard. I don't think it's changed much to this day, unfortunately.
About it like it's changed hugely. I just think it's more subtle, but it's the same. Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.